that I always do in talking about human trafficking, and usually I'm talking to a group of adults, and I ask this question: how many in this audience had heard of the term human trafficking 10 years ago? And almost no, you did.
Well, I like to watch, yeah.
Okay. Well, I didn't 10 years ago. Most of you were about 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old at the moment. So you wouldn't have probably been paying attention to words like human trafficking. But let me ask this question of you. In your high school, how many of you ever heard of human trafficking in your classroom?
High school.
Some of you then. Some of you did.
Word.
But others have not.
Yeah, like not really get into the subject, it's just to say, but not really to get in.
You never really, you heard the word.
Not engaging,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, the word has become more and more common, and human trafficking has many, many definitions. Let me hear if anybody has a definition or how they'd like to describe what human trafficking is. There are all different kinds of terms for this type of thing. Anybody have any idea of when we talk about human trafficking?
Well, I think the definition that I used was, it's the, like the kidnapping or selling of people for either service, their body parts, their organs, or for sexual purposes also.
Exactly, exactly. And also the alternative term for human trafficking is modern day slavery. But I'm going to give you the definition that I usually use. My definition of human trafficking is the process involved in the transfer of a person into illegal servitude or confinement. The difference between modern day slavery and human trafficking and old-fashioned slavery as we know it in our country before the 14th Amendment is that there is a process involved now that is much more sophisticated, much more complex than the process of bringing a slave from Africa to the United States. Because it involves bringing a person from many different places through many different ports of entry, as they're called, let's say, to the United States. But the United States is not the only place that people are brought into trafficking. It's all over the world. There's an estimation that 800,000 people, mostly women and children, every year are brought into slavery into another location from their home. And how's that happen? Let's just take the continent of Africa. They'll go into a small village and they'll say to parents, "Oh, you have a 16-year-old girl here. We can get her a good job. And as a matter of fact, we'll even give you a couple of dollars for us to take her and bring her to Great Britain, to England. And she's going to be able to send money home to you, and she'll be able to, live a good life." And so what happens is they take that 16-year-old girl, sometimes much younger, and they bring that girl through many different ports of entry, because you can't do this, you can't conduct this kind of business in the open. You have to do it all in secret, or else you're going to get caught. So they have very sophisticated, very complex ways of going from place to place to place. And it's organized. So from Africa, or let's use the country Nigeria. From Nigeria, they may bring the person up to Morocco, and that person then is handed off, and that person will go into Sicily and Italy, again handed off, all organized, and then brought up to someplace in the middle of Europe, and then finally will land in Great Britain. Meanwhile, everybody's being paid. Everybody along the line is making some money. Because when that person gets to the end, and they get into some kind of servitude, they'll be paid handsomely for delivering that person. Well, that's almost like old-fashioned slavery was, isn't it? Isn't that the way it happened? They take slaves from Africa and they bring them over to the United States and sell them into servitude. And then they became the property of the plantation owners or whoever. And that's still happening in this day and age. And I just gave you the number on an annual basis, but there is also an estimation that at this moment, 27 million people in the world are held illegally without any kind of freedom, working somehow, someplace, against their will. So that's what modern day slavery is all about. And it's almost shocking to think about that in this day and age, that people are being held against their will. What do you think are the three most profitable businesses in the world are? Illegal businesses. Drugs.
Women, like the prostitution, like that type, like the
Well,
global trafficking of that.
Human
Organs.
slavery.
And organs.
That's all under that,
Same thing?
yeah, same thing. It'd be like drugs, cocaine, or marijuana, or whatever. It's all drugs. And at this point, most of that is all illegal, at least in our country.
Do you think prostitution is still always a part of human trafficking? Because
No.
sometimes
Not at all. Sometimes people willingly enter into prostitution. No, but a good amount of it becomes a part of prostitution. The other one is guns, weapons. Those are the three biggest illegal, and they, as I've just told you, in the course of a year, it's enormous profits. They estimate that human trafficking brings in about $31 billion a year. It brings into the illegal enterprise $31 billion a year. So that's a lot of money. It's really all illegal money, and it's put to bad use. Now, when I give you these figures, they're all estimated. And one of the reasons they're all estimated is because it's hard to count all these people. It's all secret. It's all done undercover, under the table. Nobody ever goes around and say, "Oh, are you illegal? Have you been brought here, by illegally? Have you been? You've got this job as a housekeeper, or is this freely done?" Or nobody counts that. You can't count that. You can't go and ask people like they knock on. When we take census in the United States, they knock on the door and they ask you who you are, where you're from, what your background is. But you can't do that with illegal things like drugs, like weapons, if you're selling weapons, or if you're selling people. So those estimates of how much money, they could be very, very low. And they say the same thing about illegal immigration, right? Now, I'm going to give you a distinction, which is an important distinction, especially as you're hearing more and more about immigration and the immigration reform. What do you think is the difference between human trafficking or modern-day slavery and illegal immigration? Think that through a little bit. Let's talk about who the illegal immigrant usually is. How does that happen? Think about how that happens.
I mean, they're illegal immigrants, they usually come over, in Florida, they'll come over, come over on boats, things like that, like they'll do, a lot of times, like if it's Mexico, like they'll try and cross the border and like come in illegally through that way. And like families brought over, like they probably brought their families over to help them and do things like that. And then for human trafficking. I guess you're asking what's the difference in the two? For human trafficking, I mean, a lot of times, some of them, it may not have actually been something that they wanted to do, they could have been taken, like we've seen
Precisely.
things that have happened overseas where they take girls or people just because they're tourists and they take advantage of the fact that they don't know where they are, or they're too friendly or naive when it comes to that. A lot of times they could be taken from villages with families or their families were impoverished and they thought that and they need to do something about it and they thought that they were gonna go and take them with them and they would have a great life. Like there's a lot of different elements that can come to it.
Absolutely. That's the distinction. The distinction is an illegal immigrant is usually a willing participant in the process to get to a destination. Now often that gets all screwed up, quite honestly. You know, they're not brought to where they're supposed to be brought or whatever. But the coyotes, you've heard the word coyote, those are the people who actually bring illegal immigrants especially from Mexico, illegal immigrants into the United States with the promise of a job. We'll drop you off in California, we'll drop you off in New Mexico, and we'll get you a job there. And the person himself or herself says, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. As a matter of fact, I'm going to pay you to do it. And that's what usually happens. It happens with the Balseros who come from Cuba. It happens with Haitians who come from Haiti. They are willing participants. They want to escape something and get a better life. So that's the illegal immigrant. However, the modern day slave, that's not part of what they want to do. As a matter of fact, that little 16-year-old girl or 13-year-old girl, she had nothing to say about the future or her destination. So there's a very big distinction between illegal immigration and human slavery. And as a result of it, the laws will be very different relative to the two. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in just a moment. So let's talk about, and we hit on this a little bit, let's talk about a little bit about the kinds of human slavery there are. What kinds of work, so to speak, do you think they get employed in? We already talked about sexual exploitation. And most of the women, or a good number of the women, are brought from their countries, wherever it may be, and it's all over the world. And wherever there's poverty, especially, people will be attracted, or people will be attracted to go there and offer a couple of dollars to bring out somebody who becomes the slave. What kind of work do they get in beside sexual exploitation, prostitution, even children? Labor. A lot of just plain labor in field labor, labor in factories, all kinds of labor on farms. What else do you think is?
Salons, farms.
Farms.
You were saying organs, like because we've been talking about that in class and like
Yeah,
they do a lot
it's a
of,
little different. That is what, yes, that's what happens. They'll bring them over for organ donation, so to speak. So that's a newer part of this incident that's just recently been coming to light. When I first got into this, and I'll tell you about that a few years ago, that was not part of the equation anymore. Now it is. They're bringing in people to become donors of their organs.
they could do it for armies, like a lot of these countries and things like that, like they're bringing in children and people to carry guns and like to kill
Yes.
the civilians, like rebels and things like that, because they're and that's part of it, because they're all tied in. It kind of works out because like half of them are part of drug lords, and then they also do like the things like that. So they're bringing in children also, because human trafficking, and once you're doing like illegal or black market things, it kind of like ties in, if you will.
Yep. And I'm going to give you, you're going to be surprised at this one, hotel and restaurants. The hotel industry is one of the few industries so far that have made a concerted effort to try to ferret out people who are brought as slaves. And I was involved in a conference in Rome a couple of years ago, and it was co-sponsored by 3 major hotel chains. because they've been realizing that, you bring somebody to a hotel, or many times hotels contract out different services. They may even contract out their housekeeping. The woman who's cleaning a room may not necessarily be working for the hotel. She could be working for a contractor, and the contractor gets his labor or her labor by buying these slaves, bringing them every morning to the hotel, putting them in the hotel for cleaning, and bringing them out. So the hotel industry and the restaurant industry is very, very big on ferreting out human trafficking. Another, and this group you'll know, the body shop. The body shop that's in all the malls. You go to the mall, see the body shop. The body shop is very involved in that because they're realizing that the people that are picking the things that make things smell good or all that are actually victims of human trafficking. And so there are a lot of industry right now is paying attention to the source of their labor more so than they ever did before. Now, the question is, why don't they escape? If you were sitting someplace and, they're not always monitored, they're not, especially if they're cleaning hotel rooms, why wouldn't you go down the back exit?
The same reason that slavery lasted for as many years as it did in the old slavery, because of lack of education and the ignorant fact of being able to leave or being able to do certain things that keep them drugged, if you will, for as far as when it comes to sexual exploitation for women. They make sure that they're unresponsive to a certain extent, so they don't really leave or do things like that. And fear, you use fear usually in general just to keep, if you really want to press, you have to use fear.
Because if they are immigrants, sometimes your passports are taken away. The fear of reservation, you think it's something.
Exactly, they have no legal status,
Yeah.
passport is gone.
And sometimes they don't know the country that they're in, and they don't have the courage to leave where they are, because sometimes it's like surrounded in the middle of nowhere.
And sometimes it's a language barrier.
Language barriers is very big thing, language barrier.
Sometimes they're told that if they lost them, their family back home is going to be killed.
Exactly. That if they escape, we're gonna get your family back home. And then,
And debt bondage too. There's one that, oh, you owe me this debt, or whatever, so you have to do this to pay your debt.
yep, so you owe me, you can't possibly leave my employee, you owe me for bringing you here.
And even if they try to leave, they'll go after them, their family or them. It's not that they're just gonna leave it playing back there at that point, so.
The cost of that is probably, it's the victim, him or herself, that usually confines himself or herself. Because the cost of going after somebody is, they'll buy somebody else, to hunt somebody down.
Yeah.
That costs money, they have to get their people
Yeah.
to go after them. So the thing about it is, once they become slaves, they basically have incarcerated themselves. They're afraid, they don't have legal status, they don't speak the language, they're afraid of what's going to happen to their family at home. All these things keep them, so they'll even go out and buy groceries, for example, to the store for the people that they're the household slaves for. And you think, well, gee, why don't they just... They're afraid to talk to people, not only language, but they're just afraid to talk to people because it's not their culture. They have absolutely no idea how Americans or Britons or Albanians relate to one another. So they're just caught in a trap. It's like a prison without bars for most of them. And it really is something that is hard for us to imagine because of our freedom. We have so much freedom. You can choose not to come to Dr. Jameson's class or not come. You might not do so well at the end of the semester, but you have that perfect freedom. Nobody's going to keep you in this classroom. You have to walk out right now if you wanted to. There's no prison around you. You have freedom, especially in our country. We have a lot of it. Does anybody know the name of this painting?
Yes, that's right.
The Scream, you're right. Anybody know who the
Carlos Cuauhtemoc Sanchez.
Edward Munch, is that what you said?
Me? Carlos Cuauhtemoc Sanchez? Cuauhtemoc.
No, the name of he's a Norwegian painter whose name is Edward Munch. And it's got a very interesting history. While we're at it, it has nothing to do with human trafficking, but it does convey fear, obviously. All you have to do is see it, and this guy is really a guy or gal. It's androgynous, really. He did 4 of these. One is in the National Gallery in Oslo, one is at the Museum of Modern Art, and 2 are pastels. And it has a history of being stolen, all 4 of them. People go after it. And one of the reasons is because one of the watercolor pastels was sold last year for $112 million. Can you imagine? But it's a great work of art. I'm very happy to see that so many of you read it. It's great. Great. Go up to the gallery and see more art. I hope you do go to the gallery and see more art. So let me talk about St. Thomas and why I'm here, for example. I don't mean here as president, I mean here in this class today. This is the history of St. Thomas and human trafficking. In 1993, a reporter for NBC 4, whose name is Michelle Gillen, I don't know if she's still in anybody who's, you guys don't watch television, so but you don't watch television news anyway. 1993, one of the trustees of the university, one of the members of the board of trustees, brought her to see me, and she said, you know, I've been doing stories about this modern day phenomenon called human trafficking, and nobody's doing anything about it. I'm trying to bring it to people's attention, and there's no university, no government, no police out there are really paying attention to the problem. And so it was the first time I ever heard that word. I had never heard that word before, and that's why I asked that question of an adult audience. I never heard of human trafficking growing up, as you did, some of you. So, or at any time in my adult career. That was the first time I heard that word. It was that much of an undiscovered problem in those days. And thank God that somebody like Michelle Gill, a few other people in Europe and all over, were beginning to say, you know, this is happening right before our eyes and nobody's doing anything. This has been happening for years and we're just not paying any attention. So I talked to the dean of our law school at the time, who was the former Attorney General of the state of Florida, Bob Butterworth. And I said, you know, we should really be doing something about this at St. Thomas University. So we have in the law school a real neat center called the Center for Intercultural Human Rights, in which we give degrees, not just a law degree, but it's called an LLM, a Master of Laws, in Intercultural Human Rights. It's all about justice and peace, and giving justice to people. We have many international students that come into that program. So he said, you know, I do know a little bit about this, because once in a while, as Attorney General, some of these things would come to my attention, and they were very strange. They weren't just, you know, like immigrants and picking in the fields and being abused. It was more than, it seemed like more than that to me. So he became very interested, I became very interested, and the Center for Intercultural Human Rights became extremely interested. We ran, in the United States, the first international conference at St. Thomas University on human trafficking. And that was in 1994. And to that conference came all the people who had been kind of working in the area and, you know, trying to bring it to people's attention. And so they came and we had this conference, we had these high-powered speakers, and we ultimately put out, as a result of that, a document that's called the Miami Declaration on Human Trafficking. And that Miami Declaration on Human Trafficking has become the basis of a lot of education in the United States. Now, you don't remember this priest, and you know, Father Luis is our campus minister. Many of you know Father Luis, right? Father Luis is our campus minister. Well, our campus minister some years ago was Father Warren Hall. Dr. Jameson remembers him. And Carlos, I think he might have been here at the time. Father Warren Hall is now the campus minister at Seton Hall University. And he came and we visited. He was here about, we're buddies, and he came about 6 months ago. We were sitting down and talking, and we were reminiscing about this whole thing, that this is where we started. And I said, and now it seems like every school, everybody all of a sudden is paying a lot of attention to human trafficking. They're running all kinds of conferences and seminars and things to bring awareness to their students, which is great. So he emailed me about a month later and he said, guess what? Seton Hall has just kept catching up to St. Thomas. They just ran their first conference on human trafficking. So we were way ahead of the pack. And we really were leaders in this whole thing of bringing out the awareness of human trafficking to the international community, literally to the international community. As a result of that, I literally have been all over the world, and these are all the places I've been, talking about this subject. I'm not an expert, but they made me an expert. You know, they helped me write talks and gave me on. I studied it myself and everything. And so as a result of, because being the president of the university, that's a high-profile position, and so when they want somebody out of our institution to go and to address the issue, I usually am the one that goes. The two professors in the law school, Dr. Rosapati and Professor Siegfried Wiesner, are really the big experts in this area. They are looked upon, I mean, if it was a bunch of academics, they really wouldn't call me, you know. What they would do is they call Dr. Patti or Professor Wiesner, because they are the ones who have studied and drilled down into the legal issues involved in all this. And we're going to talk about some of those in just a second. The most thrilling for me talk I ever gave, and it wasn't exactly a talk, was I testified in front of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the U.S. Congress in 2007. Why? Because the Congresswoman, Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, from our districts down here, from the Southern District, has been very, very happy that St. Thomas has brought this to national level. And so when they were rewriting the act to deal with the issue on a national level, they asked St. Thomas to give testimony and input into the new congressional act on human trafficking. And I say it was one of the most thrilling things I've ever done, and I've done a lot in, you know, my career as a priest, as a president. This was really thrilling because, first of all, you've seen this setup, you know, you see it all the time. You got all the Congress people of the committee, and there are about 30-some of them. They don't all stay for the whole thing. They walk in and out and everything like that. But you got a lot of these Congress people sitting up in these stands, some kind of, you know, questioning you after you're finished. And then behind you, you have all staff people who are interested in the, I had, quote, a handler, which was our lobbyist, who, you know, was there with me and would tell me what I needed to do if I wasn't doing it right. It was a very thrilling experience. And one of the reasons it was thrilling, I thought to myself, God, you know, I was like you guys in a classroom years and years ago, and I never thought that I'd be testifying about a major global issue in front of our Congress And it was really, and I was proud to be an American on that day. And, you know, in Congress, in spite of all its problems and all the stuff we hear, still does a lot of good work in a lot of areas and does keep the world from collapsing and colliding. So it was, for me, it was a very, very big, thrilling moment. Interestingly enough, on the panel was the lawyer for the AFL-CIO, which is the big union in our country. The reason for that is because they feel that these people are kind of taking jobs away from people who really do have a legitimate interest in working. And then this young woman was a former victim of human trafficking. And you know what happened to her? She became a slave in the consulate of her country. So somebody in her country went to her parents or whoever and said, this woman is going to work. The consul is the ambassador to every country, as you may know. And that ambassador is always in Washington. And then in major cities like New York, Miami, Houston, Los Angeles, places like that are consuls that are kind of like sub-ambassadors. And they run things on behalf of their country in those regions. So this woman was the slave of the consul. Now the irony of that is, if you get in trouble in a foreign land, let's say you're from France, and you get in trouble here, the first place you go is to your consul. Now this woman had no place to go. She was enslaved by the consul. And you're going to hear in a moment of the kind of recommendations I made to the Congress, many of which got into the bill, about this type of thing. I made a number of recommendations to the Congress, and again, I didn't put these together myself. I helped do it, but it wasn't a major, the major participant. This was done by all our scholars over in the law school, and some here in the university. The first one, there are a whole number of them, and Pam, Dr. Pam sent a link to you that has my testimony
Wonderful.
in the Congress. So
We're gonna
you
put it
can,
in the
you can
website,
pull it up
yes.
from the congressional record.
Excellent.
But one of the recommendations I made is that human trafficking, modern day slavery, be considered a crime against humanity. There are different levels of crimes. For example, it already is an international crime, in as much as if someone is caught, they can be brought before The Hague, which is the international court in the Netherlands.
They have a test next week about that too, so they should be familiar what you're talking
okay,
about,
so
yes.
you know what the,
Yes.
the
criminal
international
court,
court is.
yeah,
Okay.
they should.
All right, so it's an international crime. So if you're caught doing this at any phase, whether you be the guy who goes into the village, or you're the one who provides the transportation, whether it be a boat or a truck or whatever, or you're the one who is doing the selling, if you're caught, can be brought in front of the international court if you're caught on doing this. However, it's not a crime against humanity. The crimes against, anybody know what the crimes against humanity, there are very few. Anybody know what the crime against piracy? Old-fashioned slavery, surprisingly enough. Acts of war that violate human dignity. And there's one or two others which I can't remember.
Also genocide.
Genocide, and then maybe one more. Well, what we, and I've been saying as I speak all over the world, what needs to be done here is this needs to be made a crime against humanity, not just an international crime. The difference in that is, if it becomes a crime against humanity, then it can be prosecuted any place. In other words, if you were if we caught up with you, and you just happen to be sitting in the front, so you become an example. If we caught up with you, and you were involved in human trafficking, even though you weren't in the act of doing trafficking, we could prosecute you in the United States. If you were a trafficker in Germany and you landed in the United States, we could prosecute you. So any place, anybody has jurisdiction over that crime, any place. So you're a super international criminal. You're not just going to go to one court, you can go to any court in the world if it becomes a crime against humanity. So we've been pushing for that, to try to make it into a crime against humanity. And our professors do that by going to seminars where they're discussing international law, where they're trading ideas about this whole thing. So that's one of the things that we've been pushing. One of the big points that I made to the Congress, it did not get into the Wilberforce Act. Another one was that the victim should receive realistic and protected status. Up to this point, this got into the bill. Up to this point, if you were caught, you were sent back to your country. But now you stay in the United States, you can stay in the United States, and you also do get supportive services. Because imagine, all of a sudden, you've been a slave, you're from a small village, or wherever, and you're in a country, you come to this country, and all of a sudden, you have no idea of how to get a job, or how, you're psychologically, you're all messed up, so all supportive services are now given to that. And it used to be only to those who cooperated, because another fear is that if I cooperate in testifying or turning in the person who was enslaving me, then all those problems that we talked about before could befall me or my family. So, and as a result of it, they did not get any kind of status or supportive service before this enactment came. We made a lot of recommendations on prevention, on being more secure at the point of entry. The one big recommendation we did make, and it had a great result for St. Thomas, is we made a recommendation that first responders be educated better in spotting human trafficking. Who is first responder? Who is a vulnerable person likely to go to a clergy? Because they trust clergy generally, so they would go to clergy. Doctors, nurses, they see these people because it pays to keep them healthy. And so the perpetrator, the slave holder, will bring somebody to a hospital or to a doctor or whatever. And unless they're acute to the issue, they might just say, oh yeah, well this is my niece, and she has no papers or something, and they go home. So, and police and fire are the other first responders that we said needed to be educated better. As a result of this, Congresswoman Leona Layton got a $500,000 grant for St. Thomas University to create what we call the Summer Academy. And during the Summer Academy, we have first responders come here for, I forget how many minutes, maybe a week or 10 days or so, to be trained in how do you recognize this, who are typical victims, what are the problems they're usually bringing, what are the problems you should look for. So that is something that's happened. And as a result of it, it's happening not just here in Florida, not just at St. Thomas, it's happening all over because other people are paying attention, and there is more funding going on to help prevent that. So that's kind of, again, there are other recommendations. There's a short version, which I also have, which I think probably more practical. Maybe this needs to be copied. I'll show you how thick the congressional appearance is.
Okay, so what do you think should be done when, because usually like people that are trafficked, if they ever do get a chance or if they ever feel like they have the energy and the courage to tell someone that they need help and etc., but they don't understand language, because I believe language barrier is one of the most biggest things, and especially if like police officers don't even understand what you're saying, like what solutions you think there should be.
Let's say they said, they talked to you in a language that you spoke and they spoke, you should go to the police.
No, I'm saying if you don't understand, like even because I've read cases where police officers didn't understand what the person was saying, and then you could have saved the person, but because you didn't understand, you just let it pass by.
Well, I think some of this, you know, language goes on two levels. Language is on the word level, and language is on the communication level. And if somebody comes up to you in distress, et cetera, you know, you notice distress, number one. Number two, you usually can pick up what some of the problem is. I think the fact that they're being educated to this today helps that. You know, I don't know what you would do if you didn't understand the person, but I think people are becoming more and more sensitive to it, just as we were. Do you know that there were a whole group of people at Indian Creek Country Club who were working as groundskeepers, and somebody in the club had enough sense to either talk to the person or something and realized this contractor is using human slaves to cut the grass of the country club over at Indian Creek. This was right under our nose here. It's only about 10 miles away. So somebody had the sensitivity to understand that there was something going on. And the more education, for example, if you see something that doesn't look right, say something. You know how you've got these signs about terrorism and security and all that? You know, they tell you if you see something that doesn't look right, tell somebody or something. If you see something that doesn't look right, and you ought to say something to somebody. Please. The first place to go is police. So it's a good question. You need to be alert. You need to be. One of the reasons we're doing what we're doing is so that all of us become educated in how to address the problem. I doubt, maybe someday somebody's going to be an international lawyer in this class, but I doubt that it will have a direct impact on making this a crime against humanity, direct impact, but we can do what we can do on our own level, which is always what we're educated for. So
you said that didn't improve, making it a crime against humanity?
it has not been. That's a very, very, very complex issue. It's almost like, these nuclear treaties. You say, why doesn't every country sign on to, an anti-nuclear treaty? Well, because there's money involved in it, there's defense involved in it, there's fear involved in it, there's collusion involved in it. So the same with this. It's very difficult. You have to have almost every country in the world agree. So it may come. It may come. I mean, we certainly push it anytime any of us talk, and we're not the only ones. I mean, I don't want it to sound like we have the production rights to human trafficking, but we do a lot, and other people do as much in other places. But I was going to tell you, this is the congressional testimony, so I don't think you want to pour through this. But the recommendations are simple. I would just look at the recommendations, and it is a great history of the whole issue, and much of what I said today is in here. But there is a shorter version, which I'm going to get to. Well, finally, we only have a couple minutes left. Finally, I wanted to tell you a story, which I always think is a great story that relates directly to human trafficking. The name of the act in the United States of America is called, you know how they have like the Pell Grant, for example, was named after somebody who instituted the Pell Grant. The name of the act in the United States of America is called the Wilberforce Act. Now, William Wilberforce was not an American. He was an Englishman. He was a slave trader. And he would go back and forth from Africa to the United States with slaves. As soon as he could get back down here, he was an enormously rich man. one day, he was sitting on the deck of the ship on a very calm night, looking up at the stars. And he was thinking about God, and then he was thinking about the people in the bows of the ship. And he said, these are God's creatures, what am I doing? And that night, he became an anti-slavery advocate. But the story's not over. He used all his money to get people, this was in 1833. He used all his money to get people elected to the parliament who were anti-slavery. This is long before the United States came to that conclusion. And within 10 years, he had put one particular person in there who was very, very influential in doing it. Now, I'm just wondering if anybody ever heard this song?
In grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saves a.
That song was written by the man who also had a conversion, who actually got the bill passed to end slavery in Great Britain. And we still sing that song today. How many of you ever heard of that? Well, almost everybody. So that song was written as a result of the end of slavery. So, any more questions? Well, you were great.
Now, you
know
testified,
what?
you went to the Vatican too, right? You spoke at.
I spoke,
positions.
yeah,
Yes.
if I tell you all the places I spoke,
I know.
you'd be here for another day. Yeah, I guess it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, the United States ambassador to the Vatican, who's a graduate of St. Thomas University, co-sponsored with the university and a couple of the Vatican offices, a international conference at the Vatican on human trafficking and modern day slavery. Another very exciting experience that you can imagine. So, we've been all over the world with our mission. So.
Do you have to pay for those trips, or is it paid for you?
Most times they're paid. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. The question was, do I have to pay for those trips, or are they paid? When we invite a speaker, like a high-level speaker, to St. Thomas, for example, like at the law school, or once in a while we'll have it at the main university, we usually pay the expense of the speaker. So in my case, in many cases, I was in Siena, for example. I spoke to people from the European Union in March, and those expenses were all covered on my behalf. So it's a nice gig, you know, become a university president, you know, you got a good life. Got a lot of headaches too sometimes, but it's a great life. So, greatest part is you guys, and seeing you succeed, and giving you a diploma, and it's great. So, well, thanks for the invitation.